Hello, my name is Joyce Schultz and I'm the Director of Testing for the Rochester City School District. Today I'm going to take you through a PowerPoint on preparing for the administration of the January 2014 Regents exams. These are general guidelines for proctors. The purpose of this training is to provide an additional source of directions and training for all proctors involved in administering these important exams. All proctors will have to sign off that they have viewed this training prior to Regents Week. A form will be provided to you. This training is also designed to provide an additional overview of proctoring responsibilities and to identify examples of test misadministrations and security breaches in an effort to avoid those types of situations. Prior to Regents Week, there are a few things that you can do to familiarize yourself with these procedures even further. The 2013 edition of the School Administrator's Manual of Secondary Level Examinations is posted on the State Education website. This is the most current and up-to-date manual regarding all things pertaining to Regents and RCT exams. The link to this document is at the bottom of this slide. I encourage everyone to have a copy of this downloaded to your computer desktop for quick reference. The second document that you should have that was just posted on the State Education website this week. It is entitled Directions for Administering Regents Examinations for the January 2014 Administration. The link to this document is also provided on this slide. Anyone involved in proctoring January Regents exams should have a copy of this document and review it thoroughly prior to the exam week. Another important document is the test access and accommodations for students with disabilities. The link is also on the slide to that document. It is dated 2006, but it is the most current document available on test access and accommodations. Many of the questions that come up during Regents Week pertain to students with disabilities and their accommodations. What's allowed and not allowed for examinations. This is one document that should be used in reference in addition to a student's actual IEP. Additionally, the general directions for Regents administering the January 2014 Regents has some information in it regarding this. Also, the handbook that I previously mentioned, the Secondary Level Examinations Administration Manual, indicates students with disabilities and their IEPs and what is allowable on Regents exams. The most popular question that comes up typically has to do with reading tests to students. For Regents and RCTs, students can have a reading RCT read to them and the comprehensive English exam read to them. This is different from what happens for the tests at the New York State 3 through 8 level, where there are some additional provisions around that and restrictions around that. This is an example of the exam schedule for the last week of January. The exams that have the asterisk next to them are restricted exams. Those are primarily most of the RCTs, in addition to the physics exam in January. That means that these exams all have to be returned to the State Education Department, so it's very important to keep track of those materials. It's important that you review with your school team your proctoring schedule and packet. All schools provide general information to familiarize yourself with the processes and procedures will be at the building level. This may have already happened in your building, but there needs to be a proctor orientation. So several days before the exam period, the specific directions for administering and scoring the exams must be distributed to all school personnel who will be responsible for proctoring and or scoring these exams. Scoring this year will be held centrally as it has been last year at the Hart Street location. In proctoring New York State exams, we encourage to have everyone to have two proctors in every room focusing on the testing of students. It's important to maintain the test security at all times before, during, and after the exam. The physical conditions of the room need to be appropriate for testing. Phone could be turned off. There needs to be a clock visible so students can see what time it is. There should be a sign on the door indicating that you should not be disturbed unless it's something that's very important. It is important to make sure that all materials are appropriately distributed to each student and that you follow all test administration procedures. Since Regents exams are 3 hours long, it's important to have some procedures in place to assist students with emergencies and restroom breaks during testing. Many schools have hall proctors in addition to the room proctors to assist students to the restroom during the exam period. It's important that proctors monitor students to make sure they're following the directions, performing the required tasks, bubbling correctly, and not sharing responses. It's really important to ensure that students complete the whole assessment. There is nothing wrong with encouraging a student to go back and try to finish the last few questions or a section that they may have missed. It is important to follow appropriate procedures when providing accommodations to students with disabilities and students identified as LEP or ELL, if applicable. If anything happens during the testing session that you are not sure about, if you think it could be problematic, you should report that immediately to a building administrator or principal. And it's always important to maintain student confidentiality. So, to sum up, all proctors must familiarize themselves with the directions for administering and proctoring the Regents exams. It's important that you enforce the New York State Education Department's regulations for administering exams. And each proctor must sign the deputy and proctor certificate to indicate that the rules and regulations for administering these exams were properly observed. This is an example of the deputy and proctor certificate. You can see that there are 7 rules that they identify and that there will be signatures collected at the bottom. Proctors should circulate periodically around the room during the administration of the exam to ensure that the students are recording their responses on the bubble sheet in the proper manner. It is appropriate for proctors to point out when one or more answers are blank, when students have left one or more answers blank, if students do not appear to be recording answers in the right place, and if students have provided more than one answer for a single multiple choice question. The bubble sheets that we use for these exams, students need to record their answers in ink. In the event that they need to change that answer, they should exit out and then bubble in an answer that they do want. If they change their mind a second time and decide they want to go back to the first answer that they had, they can simply circle it. You cannot erase on these bubble sheets with the ink recordings. In terms of time, no additional time beyond the 3 hours may be provided to students to transfer answers from a test booklet to answer sheets at the end of the test. And no one other than the student may transfer answers marked in his or her test booklet to a multiple choice answer sheet. This doesn't necessarily apply to students who have IEP or Section 504 plans that stipulate additional time is needed for completing exams, and or that they have someone identified as an accommodation to record exams, to record bubbles for them. That's a different scenario. Additionally, ELL students are also allowed additional time as an accommodation. In terms of aid to students, no one under any circumstances may interpret or explain examination questions to any student, nor can anyone comment to a student on the correctness or the sufficiency of a student's response while the exam is in progress. If a student asks whether or not what a word means, whether or not their answer is right on state exams, the proctors may advise the students only to use their best judgment. There should be a clock in sight to students so that they know how they're doing in terms of time on the exam. If that's not possible, the proctor can certainly record time on the board. Additionally, it is okay to record the different intervals of you have, an hour left or 2 hours left. That's appropriate to do. No student can leave the room and then return to the room unless they're accompanied by another proctor, for example, a hall proctor. If somebody leaves the room and withdraws from the site of the proctor during exam, they must have their exam for that session terminated. Any exam paper that is removed from the exam room without authorization would also be invalidated. It's very important, especially since proctors are often working with students that are not necessarily their own, that plans are made before the administration of these exams to verify the identity of each student entering the room, especially students who are not enrolled in which the school they are taking the exams. Accurate records, and this is really important, must be kept of the students who take each exam so it will be possible to confirm the presence or absence of a student for each examination period. We often have situations come up where it's very unclear whether or not a student actually sat for an exam. That's why these records, in addition to any other attendance keeping, are kept. Students who are taking the state exams must be kept under close supervision at all times during the exam session. When they enter the room, all materials brought into the exam room must be inspected to make sure that the materials do not contain any unauthorized notes or printed material that would give them an unfair advantage. The materials that students are permitted to bring into the exam room are identified in this section of the manual, and this is the secondary level administration manual, under the heading of materials provided by school and by students. Students are not permitted to obtain information or give information to any other students during the exam period. If, in your opinion, it looks as though students are attempting to do this, the first step is to warn the students that any further attempts will result in the termination of their exam. If necessary, students can also be moved to another location at this time. If these two steps do not end the attempts of students to try to exchange or give information, then the building principal or administrator should be notified immediately and the student's exams terminated. At the conclusion of the exam period, any suspected acts of fraud, which this is considered, must be reported to the principal. Further from there, the principal would identify those incidents with the director of testing. During a Regent's exam period, if there needs to be an emergency evacuation of the building, the principal has the full authority to interrupt the exam immediately. If there's a bomb threat, a fire alarm, or any situation where the safety of students is endangered, the principal has the authority to halt the exam. Typically, the time has to be recorded when the exam was interrupted. While students are out of the classroom, they should be kept under continuous supervision as much as possible. If it's feasible, after the incident is over, for the testing to resume given the time, the students may be permitted to continue taking their interrupted test only if they had been kept under continuous supervision and were not permitted to speak with each other during the interruption. In these circumstances, the ending time for the test should be adjusted so that the students are given the full allotment of time for the examination. Following the exam, the principal will contact the director of testing, and a written report of the circumstances must be sent by mail or fax to the Office of State Assessment.